I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Mark Steenbarger, who is the founder and CEO of Point of View Stories. So, Mark, thank you for being with us today. I'm so excited.
My pleasure, DJ. Good to see you as always. Yeah, I'm here in Indy with you, so it's always fun when we get together in person too. So, yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we connected in a pretty interesting way. So, Mark was just telling me that he actually was doing some research online, found the Film Therapy podcast that is kind of out there. We kind of hit a hiccup with production, but we connected that way. He got on the newsletter, and then we ended up doing a project together with
Yes.
someone we both know. And then from there, just kept in touch, kept talking. Hopefully, we'll be working together in the future. But yeah, I love what you're doing, Mark. And I think that it's a perfect conversation for how to make impact with film. So tell us a little bit about what you do with Point of View Stories.
Yeah. We are a film production company and we're making very specific films. So, they're narrative and they're short. They are. If we're doing the film festival route, we would be submitting to like those microfilm festivals, are because where runtime is about 5 minutes on average. So these are very short. If you're a person of faith, you're familiar with what a parable is. That's kind of what loosely the story structure I'm trying to parallel. Just something where you're dropped into the middle of a story. You don't get a lot of exposition, and you definitely don't get much resolve. And the idea is that we use these films as conversational prompts in a therapeutic context. And so that's why what you were doing was very similar. Like you guys were watching a clip, you were kind of dissecting a piece of a movie, and then kind of talking about the therapeutic impact. And so our application is we have a streaming platform that our members, which are agencies that are helping those coming out of commercial sexual exploitation and helping them get back into life in typically like a 2 year program. And part of that healing journey is you can get stuck on just kind of what the trauma has done and the beliefs that you've been told to believe. And as you begin to unpack that and rewire that, film is a great tool, an intervention tool to help with that process. I mean, and we could nerd out on this part for a long time, but um, there's just something about the way we consume film. And there's a lot of research. If you Google cinema therapy, you can see tons of research where they've proven this, that whether it be our defenses are down or just our inabilities to, our ability to be more present, or we're not so defensive, we're not scanning for protection, and we know this in real life too, right? Like I can find flaws in you, fashion you. I can find flaws in myself, right? Like we have that posture, but there's even like neurology happening in the way that we mirror stuff. And so there's things that get communicated that are just really, really hard to verbalize. And so while a lot of therapy, top down therapy, is cognitive, we're trying to create this cognitive conversation, but putting it in a somatic container by utilizing film.
Mhm.
As we all know, film is what I love about film is in some ways it's a box that has almost all the arts in them. So it's like the art of arts because we have music, we have the acting, we have imagination, we have illusion. All those fit into film, and it creates just a powerful experience. And it's also the only art form that really engages all seven types of learnings. When you look at the learning theories, film is just that saturating of us in a very non-threatening way, right? And yeah, so in the same way you might be moved to tears or laughter in a film, imagine also being able to be moved to get a new insight or an aha. And documentaries are great at this too, right? Like they bring you into a new perspective of an issue. And so the issue is similar, but we're just trying to find those internal relational issues that make us vulnerable to coercion, but also help us enrich our lives and have healthy relationships going forward.
That is absolutely amazing. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper into the different things that you said. So, just starting with the parable, the idea of the
Yeah.
parable. Can you break down kind of how you took the parables in the Bible and kind of transferred those pieces into a structure for film?
Yeah, I think what attracted me to it was, and growing up, I was very familiar with most of these. Like Good Samaritan is a very popular one. I think there's at least 40-ish in there. Some a little more popular than others, but some of those, like, there's a lot of times his disciples, Jesus' disciples, after he tells this story, they would lean into him and be like, "What does that mean?" And that always fascinated me. Like, why is he being so vague, seemingly? And why is he telling stories? Like, he gets asked a question, "Hey, how do I enter the kingdom?" And he goes, "Once upon a time." Like I'm like, that's just kind of a weird way to answer somebody's question, is to just spin off into stories. And then, but it was so effective, seemingly. Like, why would he keep going back to that tool, to use that language? And so that was what intrigued me. And so I bought, like, I think 4 books on parables, and just trying to understand, like, okay, if Jesus, if that's what his go-to story or his go-to communication tool and his verbal approach to change was parables, I want to really understand this more. And so then I just, on my own, nobody has really, from a arc or archetype or story perspective, breaking it down, but they talk about the meaning of it and the intention of it, and a little bit of the literary style. So, but I began to just my own layman's kind of breakdown, and I was observing that, there is this introduction into a setting, and it's quick and it's set quickly. Like, there's a farmer sowing seeds. Boom, like, you're there. You're a farmer. Got it. I can see the seeds. I can see the land, and some fall on this, some fall on that. Or the Samaritan, a man traveling. Got it. And so just realize, okay, we need to get to this scene quickly, and just drop you into that moment, because that's what I felt was happening as we read those. Is like, it's just like we just jumped in the middle. Like, we don't know where those guys were coming from before. Scholars have guesses, but you and I, as the reader, we just find ourselves in the middle of this road, and here's this man to the side of the road that's needs attention. And then the second part is, like, obviously there's an exchange that happens. There's this relational component, whether it's the relationship of the seed to the soil, or whether it's the 3 people going past the person of need. There is still conflict. So, like, in a good story of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, like, we always talk about the conflict. There's still conflict. There's still climax. There's still resolution. So, still trying to find elements of that. So, obviously there's conflict. And also, I have some background with improv. Did that around the Midwest with some great folks, and we knew a great scene had to have conflict. Otherwise, it wasn't entertaining at all. It didn't hold people's attention. And so, how do we quickly get conflict in these settings? And then the last piece of that was, none of his parables resolve it, and I think that's why they leaned in and asked these questions. And so already it just seemed to spark that knowledge gap, which would create conversation naturally. So I thought, if we can do something similar where we give you a cohesive exchange, where you see 2 friends and the third one's the third wheel, and we show you a little experience or a moment where that third person gets that third wheel experience. And then we're kind of left with her. What does she do with it? And we just kind of cut to black in those moments. What a great way to have somebody ask. And for real, like, when I show it to people outside of the therapeutic context, like family or parent friends, they're all like, "So what happens next?" Or, "What was that about?" Like, because they want that next piece. And I'm getting the same experience where they're like, "What is that? What does that mean?" Yeah. And in the hands of our facilitators, so our films are meant to be not viewed alone. They're intended to have that facilitator sitting next to them who's been trained by us, and they get to ask, "What do you see here?" And as they share what they see, it's been amazing, the various responses to the exact same event, how it hits everybody so differently. So, somebody taking money out of a cash register in one of our films, when asked, why would she do that? We've gotten no shy of 6, 7, 8 different explanations, and they're all coming from their held belief, and they're actually putting themselves in the story. And it's actually in doing this work that I'm getting the aha moment, like maybe, and this is just a Markism, but maybe that's the point, is that we would put ourselves in these stories. Okay, am I going to be the Samaritan that stops? Am I, like, if we put ourselves in the story, how do we respond?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack in there in terms of, and I just before I ask the next question, I just want to go back to the third wheel.
The third one.
The third, you mentioned a third wheel.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. The third, yeah, yeah.
I wanted to go back. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so one of the things in this, someone coming out of this experience, is trust. Who do I trust? Like, their trust has been inverted. They gave all their trust to this person, whether it was a recruiter or a pimp, and it didn't go well for them. And so they have really a challenge on who is trustworthy, and it challenges a lot of these healing centered agencies that we partner with. When someone comes to their place, they say, hey, we're here to care for you. We actually care about you. You can trust us. And the survivor's like, I heard that before. And so, how do we do that when someone is so lost on who's trustworthy? How do we do that? And so, the attempt that we took is, what if we showed somebody that was in a seemingly healthy friendship, but circumstances made it hard for her to continue to invest in that relationship? And because that relationship was maybe touch points were starting to drift because of work, because of life, because of the demands of the world, then another friend slipped in there. So now you have these two friends, and this third friend, who was the close friend, feels a little more distance and is now beginning to feel that third wheel. If you've ever hung out with just two friends and there's just three of you, well, let me put it this way. When there's four of you, it seems to be very natural. Like, two of us can have a conversation, we can cross-talk, what have you. But when there's just three of us, like, three's company, right? Like, it can get a little challenging, a little awkward, a little, you know, kind of stumbling through some things. So we show our protagonist getting squeezed out, if you will, of this new burgeoning friendship. And then what does she do with that? Because she's experiencing hurt. And then she meets this new friend who she barely knows. And she's then faced with a crossroads of, do I continue to celebrate something that is important to my well-known dear friend, or do I abandon ship and go and pursue a friendship with this unknown person who may be bringing me towards harm? And so just allowing the viewer to wrestle with that. And I just felt like that third wheel of that outsider being squeezed out could be a really subtextual experience that many of us can relate to.
Is that something that you put into all of the stories? This trust issue, the third wheel, the are these elements that you put into each parable?
Yeah, so we will take a mega theme. So that for that one, for the third wheel, that was trust and looking at relationships and trust. So each of our films has that kind of umbrella mega theme. So like the one we're working on now that we'll be shooting this summer is around grief. So as we were talking about trust, now we're looking at grief. So how does grief show up? And we're specifically going to lean into the idea of acceptance, because and on a personal, I do bring a personal component to each of these. So for the third wheel, definitely been that third wheel, so I can bring that experience into it. But also with the idea of grief, having lost my mom just 2 years ago, like, a mother just brings acceptance to you, right? Like, when all else fails, mom's got you. Hopefully, if you have a good, healthy relationship, that mom is with you. And so that acceptance, so you lose that acceptance, if you will, because that person is no longer with us. And so now looking at grief, we're looking at acceptance and how does that show up in friendships? So we still have relational components of where they're trying to find that acceptance now that that particular person is no longer with us, because that's the effect of grief. So in the same way, the effect of lost trust, how do we respond to that? Where she feels maybe a little betrayed because this other friend is kind of replacing her. How do we also, when we're beginning to lose acceptance, how do we replace that, or how do we move forward because of that? So you could say the common thread of all of our parables is the because of. So because of broken trust, how do we move now? Because of grief, how do we move now? And I do see that in the parables, right? Like, because of what happened to this man, because of now what? Do I engage with him? Do I walk past him? Yeah, or the seeds on the soil. Now, okay, now they've been planted, and because of that, what happens? Well, some get in thorns, some flourish, some get choked out, and then what is then that second deeper allegorical context of what that means can mean what it is to them. So yes, they may not feel like the third wheel, but they know what it feels like to be squeezed out. They may not have lost a mom, but they may know what it is to have lost acceptance and having to find themselves rediscovering and getting footing in those areas.
It's amazing. So, how did you get to the point where you were making films for trafficked individuals?
Yeah. So I'm a graduate of Taylor University, so shout out there. And I got a degree in computer science. And but even at Taylor, I had this moment where I did an improv audition for a play, which I didn't get. I was nervous, too nervous, but oh my goodness, the jam session we did in preparation for that was so elating. So I came home, and this is like mid '90s, 1994. And so came home and I'm like, this is amazing, this whole acting thing. And so I pursued that in the background, doing community theater. I went to Second City at one point, took a weekend class. Yeah, and just took all this in. Started doing improv at Comedy Sports in Indianapolis, and then took some training even in Atlanta with Whole World Theater, and joined with a couple partners, and then that morphed into other couple partners, and doing that around the Midwest was extremely rewarding, and creating what my wife gave me the language of a moment for people. And it was my wife's, she finished her degree from Grace College, and she went into human services and worked for a anti-trafficking agency here in Indianapolis. And she was working with youth. So these are girls and boys under 18 years old. And she was coming home and educating me on what was really happening in our backyard. And I was very oblivious. I was so naive. I just assumed Sound of Freedom or Taken. I felt like that's trafficking happens over there. And no, this is Near East Side Indie, right? Like this is local to us. And it's not this taken by force thing. It's a taken by the mind thing. And once I was beginning to understand, I was, oh my goodness, can we create a moment for them? And film is just the natural medium to be able to go into a space. You can't go in and perform or do a comedy show for them. So I was like, I just got to learn film so I can create this box of a moment that we can create for them. And so I got my master's degree through the Vermont College of Fine Arts and graduated from that in 2021, and used our first six as our thesis for that. And that's kind of how we got started. And Jill connected me to Emily Taylor Ginger, who's our impact producer. And she's the one that has the clinical knowledge and experience, having worked with trafficking for the last 10 plus years. And so she helps me identify these are the stuck points of trust, of grief, and helps me then kind of craft the concept with my cast and crew, and then we go and create the concept and shoot and edit the film.
Wow, it seems like this. I don't know if the word is a perfect storm, but I can see God's hand kind of in all these pieces that you're telling me that you were studying one thing, you happened to try this other thing, it really stuck with you.
Yeah.
It you begin to grow in this journey of creating moments.
Yes.
You meet your wife, she coins the term,
Yes.
what she's doing kind of links with what you've been doing, and then you take the next step at getting your master's,
Yeah.
and through that, this is birthed out. So I think that's really amazing. I love to hear how, in the moments we don't always know or see what that thing is that we're being called to. And I love how God's used you, your gifts, your merit, like everything to bring you to this point to impact people's lives. And so, can you take me back to and what around what year is this? You said 2021. You went for your master's, but
Yeah,
when were
so
you?
Emily, Jill, and I had dinner in 2019, August of 2019. So that was the sit down dinner at Ale Emporium to be like, hey, can film show up logistically, therapeutically, effectively in the settings that y'all do as
Mhm.
therapists? And
And just for the viewers, Jill, Emily is your current impact producer,
correct, yes, Emily
and
Taylor is her
yeah,
our impact
and Jill's
producer,
your wife.
and Jill is my wife. Yes,
Yeah.
and Jill was a case manager working with Emily at the same place, so that's how they got connected. Same agency, and Jill is the case manager, so she's working with the girls and helping them with independent living skills, and Emily was working with the same girls and helping with their therapeutic progress. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of how they provide those wraparound services together. And then that's also how I got connected to Emily.
Wonderful. And can you kind of share at your during your time with your MFA,
Yeah.
what was going on as you were, going through your studies, and this stuff is kind of gelling together, all of these pieces.
Yeah. It was interesting because I get there and they're like, okay, what I loved about the program, it's very student driven, meaning you get to show up and you're like, hey, this is what I want to work on, which I love. I thought that was amazing. It's called low residency. So you're there for a week. And then the rest of the 6 months, you work with a mentor. I mean, what a great structure. And so my first mentor is Guy Madden. He's a filmmaker from Canada. He's has some notoriety. He's in Wikipedia. So whatever milestone that is, he achieved that level of fame and status. Because I'm not in Wikipedia. So, but I found out people would just kind of look at me when I said this is what I was trying to do. So there was just some confusion at first. But after showing like the first few rough cuts or whatever to Guy, he emailed me one day, and this email's on my wall at home because he says, Mark, I love this genre you seem to have created. And I was like, I never thought about it from a genre lens. So that was just extremely encouraging, extremely motivating, extremely affirming that, man, we've been beyond something, something new, something fresh. And so I'm still learning how to articulate what we do well. And we're getting some of the help around that messaging. But yeah, and I had that struggle with every of my professors. So it's a 2 year program, so four props. But once a couple months into it, they were finally tracking, and they too were just like, "Oh, that's what you're doing." And so yeah, it was quite the journey through that. And I feel like the misconceptions was that we're doing something commercial, and while there is that input that Emily is bringing to the table, it's really just kind of bringing a parameter to a subject or to a topic, much like you would with a documentary. Like, hey, I want to document, this event that happened in history or that's going to happen, or even a wedding. In my opinion, is a form of a documentary moment. You're not going to go over and just start filming, cars driving by, unless that adds to the story, or the guy pumping gas next to the wedding venue. You're probably not going to include that because it's not part of your story. So, in the same manner, we still had 100%. We have 100% creative freedom in what we're creating, what the characters are, what the locations are. So I think once I was able to get that, they were extremely supportive, and it was just a wonderful experience to have professional, well-established filmmakers with years of filmmaking experience really speak into the process and just kind of help you from identifying scene tones to story structure to just looking at good examples dating back to the 60s of films that were really strong storytelling films and cinema.
That's so great. I think that's a wonderful process of learning. I felt the same way with my master's program.
Yeah.
We were There are things we had to learn, but it was also very driven with what we wanted to do.
Hmm.
And I felt the same way with, uh, s- finding this world of social impact entertainment. And even more specifically, what you're doing is you've honed in on this specific area of impact, and it does feel like that. It's this new way of thinking, but in some ways, I wonder if it was more of an original way of thinking about the arts.
Yeah.
Like, what are we supposed to do with this? Are we supposed to like have award shows and get lots of money? Or was this a gift that we can use for communication and impact? And I'm not against those things, but it did make me think, like, when we were given this gift as human beings, what were we supposed to do with this? And so it really fascinates me. You could have a whole nother podcast just talking about things I've read in the Bible about
Mm.
artists, and I still try to continue to learn about our design as creators and what we're supposed to do. So I love that. I wanted to dive into your process a little bit because I know you have a writer's room,
Yeah.
which I still would love to jump in at some point
You're
when
invited always.
yeah, thank you. I wish that my schedule is so sporadic, but I'm so intrigued about this way that you've developed to come up with your story. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So the very first ones, it was just me and Emily, and I would just spitball an idea like, what if somebody's doing this and they walked out, and that worked. It did. And then, but also trying to engage more people. And really it continues to evolve. So it's not very static. How we're doing it this year is still even different than last year. With the biggest difference being bringing our two key protagonists that we have right now are in this stage now. Before we got kind of to a script stage before we handed it off. So they are actually shaping the concept. And why I wanted to do that was the backstory. Something we learned about in improv is you get to decide who your character is well before you take that stage. And so if you want to be a 90-year-old old man, it would probably fit whatever suggestion was given to you. And so you could develop the character prior to that moment of getting told things and having to react in real time. And so in the same way, I wanted our actors to have that knowledge and that space and time to fully think about their characters, doing the classic stuff, right? Like, where'd you go to high school? Like, how many brothers and sisters do you have? Like, doing all those things, but even more other things around what were the traumatic events that happened, and just getting that. And so that's something we've added this year. So we'll start with that, what I call the big idea. So like grief, for example. And right now we're looking at about an 8-week process of concepting, where we get what I call the big word idea, and then we leave with a approved script, not a script, but a approved concept. So we haven't written the script yet. So the 8 weeks is okay, reflecting on that word just from our own personal lived experience. So DJ, what do you, when you think of grief, what does that mean? And we'll just explore that and just take raw notes around that, just like one sentence summaries. Then we also look like, okay, what are those emotions or things that come with contributing to that? And that's where we landed, like in this case, acceptance. And what does acceptance look like? What's maladaptive acceptance look like? And just spitball a bunch of like one-liners around that. And then as that becomes into focus, we'll then say, okay, we've got this long list of random statements. What kind of scenario could you begin to see? And we'll just get like a little fragment, like, okay, I see maybe like in the living room, these two people are having this kind of conversation around blah, such and such. We're like, okay. And we get like 3 or 4, I think this last one we had about 3 different but similar ideas. And then, and I'm checking in with Emily every step along the way. So we're like, okay, last week, here's what we came up with. And she'll kind of just tweak it or shape it a little bit. And then we come down to that final.
Who tweaks it? Emily?
Yeah, Emily. Yeah, she'll,
Mm.
the our impact producer, she'll kind of speak into it, and she'll just bring like little things like, like we're talking about acceptance, and one of the cast members mentioned a dog. Like, what a great like metaphor for loyalty. and on, just abundance of acceptance, right? Like what dog, if you've ever owned a pet, that dog will greet you like you're the hero. You're gone 3 minutes, you're gone 3 hours in their mind. They're just so excited, like what the epitome of acceptance. And so, how can we weave that in? And so our cast member was like, what if we have her just kind of see a dog, and the dog kind of comes up to her, she just has almost a disassociated moment, and the dog just leaves and goes back. But she's like looking at the dog, and the viewer can then infer, oh, she's probably reflecting, and that dog is helping her reflect. And Emily brings that little touch. She's like, man, the epitome for me is a homeless person with a dog. Because even more so, that loyalty is to somebody who can't even provide.
Mhm.
And wow. And that goes deep, right? Like now we can talk about all sorts of things. So those little moments of shaping the details. And then finally we get that concept. We're like, okay, again, there's some, it's peppered with some like specific lines, but it's still more of a narrative of, okay, these two people walk up these stairs, they go into this, there'll be exchange here. This person will discover this. They'll have an argument, and we might have specific lines where we'll just say there'll be this argument, and then they'll leave, whatever. And then I take that to my community. So this is now we invite lived experience folks, other clinicians, and we just kind of read them the story, if you will. And we did that this week, and like someone with lived experience said, hey, in the life, food was rare. Like it was used as a reward system. So like leaning into that. So we had like them carrying Takis or something, and they said no, it would be a reward if they're actually eating something. That's a reward. So they need to be like it needs to be a thing. So that helped us realize, okay, we need to. It can't be just this casual like they're walking out. This is like, oh, I'm so hungry. These are so good. Like, right, we're going to amp that up. So those little nuggets come from those with lived experience and those working with those with lived
Mhm.
experience. And then that's it. Now we have a kind of a, and we take that feedback, of course, but now we have a concept. Now we can begin into storyboarding and scripting and pre-production. You know?
Wonderful. So you're bringing, so you're, what I love what you're doing so much is that you're allowing each person along the journey to pour themselves into
Yes, totally.
this idea, this movie,
Yeah.
from the writers to the people who lived experience to your production, your team,
Yes.
your impact producer to I that's so beautiful. It creates you guys, and you guys, I've seen several of Mark's films. It just, even though it's short, even though we're dropped in, when I watched it, not being in any of these groups, but I feel like there's a richness to it that I couldn't put my finger on,
Mm.
because even though it was short,
Yeah.
even though, I could feel that there was, it was deep somehow. And I didn't know how or why, but you explaining this, oh yeah, this, people are pouring pieces of themselves and
Yeah.
pieces of their
Yes.
stories into it, which is just beautiful. And I really, you really developed, I just want to echo your mentor, developing this thing, this process. And I mean, I will say, because of the things that I do and create, when I can see how God is working and co-creating and developing, it's just, it's something different. It's not always this system, this cookie cutter thing.
Right.
It's really people centered, and
Yeah.
people are gonna people be peopling, as people say, and
So true.
we can't just systematize all the time. I know we have to have systems to get things done, but I just want to just say how much I love that, and thank you for sharing that process and what you do. Um, so just to kind of wrap up, I'd love to ask you about your vision, so people can understand what you're trying to do on the business side. You're trying to really work with agencies, right?
Correct.
Agencies who help these girls and boys, people, rehabilitate.
Yes.
And that's who you're trying to reach with these projects. So can you talk a little bit about like how people can reach out to people who are part of agencies, people
Mm.
who just want to help,
Yeah.
people who care. Like how can we help?
Yeah, no, that's great. And we're in about 10 states right now, I think, and maybe 15 different agencies nationwide from California to Virginia. So that's been exciting. And yeah, and there are agencies here in Indy that we're still not in, like Hope Center or True Harbor. So if you have connections there, that'd be great. um, and we're and just this is semantics a little bit, but the way our services are set up, folks doing what I want sexual assault is actually different than those doing sex trafficking, which to a layperson, to myself even, like, what's the difference? But the dollars that support those types of work are separate, and so they become unfortunately siloed a little bit. So we've been really leaning into those, working those coming out of sexual exploitation, but it would be still applicable to the sexual assault community. We just haven't really made connections there, so people could definitely introduce us or make those connections. But yeah, my email is mark@pointofviewstory.com. Our website is pointofviewstory.com. Instagram is Point of View Story, and LinkedIn Point of View Story. So those are the three places, email, and then we're not really on Facebook or any of the others. We're just pretty much Instagram and LinkedIn, and trying to connect with agencies or those that can connect us to agencies. And we made some relationships to those in Canada, even so, even outside of the U.S. Um, we're leaning into English speaking. We are in Romania currently, and we did translate there, but I think we're still trying to just get our footing fully more here on the state side, and translate in Spanish, so we have subtitles. At some point, we'd like to do original Spanish speaking films, possibly, because we do, as you know, we have a huge Spanish speaking population, especially like in Texas and Miami and places closer to the border where some of this unfortunately shows up a little bit more intensely. So, but yeah, introductions are always amazingly, because the trust is already there, and trying to communicate what we do is confusing at first, because people think, oh, it's a documentary. Like, no. Oh, it's how to train, how to, no. No, this is an actual moment we're trying to create in the healing journey to help somebody get unstuck. And so, yeah, follow us. We do premiere our films here in Indy. So we're going to do 4 this year. So there'll be 2 premieres. We'll do 2 at a time, and it'll be somewhere in town. It'll either be at the Can or we did the Art Center in Broad Ripple last year. We've screened at the Athenaeum. So it'll be probably one of those types of places, living room, something like that. And
What about creatives who are interested in using their art for impact and may resonate with this particular issue? How can creatives get involved?
yeah, so also reach out to me. I've got a guy who's in college in Florida, but he lives here. He's, as we speak, he's Googling through Google Earth, trying just to help us scout for some locations. So what a creative way to stay involved. So, but if you're here in Indy, I work out of Fountain Square. You're more than welcome to pop in, help us push. And I tell people, you're a lot. You're welcome to hop on the train. Lindsay had a podcast called Union Station, and I stole her analogy. But like, imagine you're on a train and there's these stops. You can get off the train whenever you want. You can get on the train whenever you want. And so you could definitely join us on set, or be a part of the writing piece, or help me with scouting, or just tag along. I definitely am connecting with other people, like the folks, like Raymond and others you and I've connected with. And there's other folks doing documentary work I could connect folks to if that's more your style. So we're definitely doing narrative work and documentary work. The more I do this, the more I see the differences and how much I'm not probably going to be very good at documentary work. So, but happy to connect those people, Josh Chitwood and others here in town that are doing great work. Yeah, so that's something that is my heart too, DJ, is like what we do with Believers Entertainment, and then just also just trying to connect with others and send opportunities, whether it be for the acting. We do pay our actors and our crew, but we only shoot 4 times a year, so it's a lot of days in between. So just trying to get folks pointed to other projects, absolutely, and happy to do that. Yeah, I learn when people come on set. People see things that we just don't see, and so it's always helpful and always a learning experience. And yeah, and it seems to work well.
Okay, so just to kind of recap, we people can get connected with you who who are part of agencies or have connections to agencies. Creatives who want to make an impact and care about this topic can also connect with you, and we can also connect with you by coming out and supporting you at the screenings for these films as well.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and the actors too. Like it's an opportunity just to give them
Yes.
that red carpet moment that they deserve with all the sweat and tears that
Absolutely.
they've put into it. So yes,
Absolutely. Yes. And then for you guys who probably heard Mark mention Believers in Entertainment, that is a Facebook group with creators who are Christians in entertainment. We just get together once a month to pray over our careers and for the industry. It's in its early stages, so we're continuing to grow, but you can definitely find it on Facebook if you want and join us. People don't always come every week. That's totally fine. We understand our industry, but people do share the prayer requests. And like when we meet up, we do pray over it. And definitely want to make sure now that we've had this conversation, pray over the work that you're doing as well. And so we will put in the show notes all the ways you can get in touch with Mark and what he's doing. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us today on Film for Impact. This was an amazing conversation.
thank
I want to
you.
say thanks, Mark, for joining us.
Yes, thank
And
you.
I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.